Okay, so this is a strategy that is highlighted in the tips and strategies section of Khan Academy Official SAT Practice. And it is a version of a famous active reading strategy technique called SQ3R, and I've sort of adapted it for the SAT. The S stands for survey, the Q stands for question, the R's stand for, there are 3 R's. First one is read, second one is recite, third one is review. And so let's see how that works. Okay, so we're gonna do an overview of this, and then we'll move into looking how it works on a passage. So we're first going to survey. When you turn to a new passage in the SAT, turn the page, there it is, bang. What do we do? If we follow this strategy, and there are other strategies, but this one works pretty well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read the blurb for context. The blurb is a little small print at the top. It's going to tell you a little bit about what you're about to read. It's going to tell you the title. It's going to tell you the year that it was written, and we'll just sort of let that go. But you should skim it, because it's going to start bubbling away in the back of your mind. Then skim this is part of the surveying, the scanning and skimming you're going to do. If you just have a quick look at the first sentence of every paragraph, this is going to take you 1 minute. Don't take a lot of time with it, because you are going to read the passage, believe it or not. And then I'd like you to consider surveying the questions too. In doing that, you're going to put little marks in them. You're going to read and see what, whether there are questions that mention paragraph 3, whether there are questions that mention specific line numbers. And you're going to put you'll put brackets along the side of your passage. And again, this is just a quick scan and skim. You're not trying to do these questions. You're not trying to remember these questions. You also can circle weird names of big words in the questions, because if you have looked at them once, the chances are good that your brain will kind of perk up when you read it, when you're finally reading the passage. And this should take not very long, just a minute or 2. Not as much as 2, probably close to a minute. So the next thing you're going to do is going to do the question stage. And the question stage is just a really quick thing, and it's all just about getting fired up. You're just going to be like, okay, why do I care? Get excited. Maybe I'm not excited about this, but I'm going to make myself excited, because that way I'm going to ask questions as I go. What's the point of this passage? These are some questions you could ask yourself. You don't have to answer it. You don't need to take too much time. But the idea is, what is this about? What do I hope to learn in this passage? Then you're going to start reading actively. What does reading actively mean? It means underlining and circling claims, things that the paragraph is saying, this is a problem, and then that may be a claim, and then there'd be examples throughout the paragraph that support that claim. You're going to underline and circle keywords. The idea is just sort of do with your hand, the gestures that you're making with your hand on the page, what you hope your brain is doing in terms of remembering what you're reading. You're reading actively. You should make quick notes. We have 3 different kinds of, there are 4 different really useful quick notes you can make. There's the plus. If the author is supporting some idea, you could put a little plus in the, in the margins. If there's, something's being undermined, something is being criticized heavily, you can put a minus. If the people that are being described are confused, you could put a question mark. If the people who are being mentioned are excited, there's this huge discovery, then you could make a little exclamation point. Those are just ways to engage with what you're reading. Other 2 points I want to make are circling the but and circling the and. The but is basically contrast words, and you could probably thinking of them right now. We have, however, unfortunately, there are tons of them. And the and, nevertheless, even so, in fact is actually a contrast word. Then we have circling the ands, and that's therefores and since and so. Those are all and words. Those are important to circle. The last thing I'll mention is the semicolon. Semicolons are helpful because they usually indicate that the sentence is going to tell you the same thing in a slightly different way. So if you don't understand the first time, maybe the second time will it'll be more straightforward. So a semicolon is also a form of an and. Okay, so that was the reading. That was active reading. And then as you go, I also want you to consider, after every paragraph, saying, what was that about? What was the point? And you make a little note in the margin. You use your own words to describe what you're reading, and that kind of gives you control over what you're reading. So you don't find yourself reading the second paragraph and realizing you have no idea what the first paragraph was about. It happens, especially with, on test day to many people. The more you're able to rephrase it as you go along after every paragraph, and then finally the review part is after completing the passage, the more you'll be set up to answer the questions correctly. Okay, the next big reading strategy I want to talk about is just a follow-on of this active reading, and that is two critical things. Excuse me. One of them is rephrasing, and one of them is predicting. Rephrasing is a way of getting control of a question. A lot of these questions just kind of peter out at the end, and they don't actually have a question mark. This is the reading section. What I want you to avoid at all costs is doing this. Don't read the questions, then the choices, and choose the one that sounds best. We talked about that earlier. It's not the best way to do the SAT or any test. What you should do is to rephrase if possible. We'll see what that means in a second. That's using how, what, or why. Every question can't be rephrased using how, what, or why, but many of them can, and those that can, it's worth doing. Because what it does is it gives you control of the question and gives you a more pointed question to go back to the passage and read around and predict. So you're reading around any line references that are mentioned in the passage, in the question. You're reading around, and then you are going to predict. So rephrasing and predicting are the two things that you should find yourself doing again and again as you go. And the goal is to know what you want before you start looking. Okay? If you know what you want before you start looking, you're not going to wind up looking at the choices one by one and trying to make sense of them. Okay? Because that's just a recipe for losing a lot of time. Spending time giving the benefit of the doubt to questions, to answer choices that aren't right, and you find yourself trying to figure out how they could be right, when you're much better served. You'll save more time if you go and you get your own answer, you trust yourself, and get your own answer, and then cross out the ones that don't match your answer, because your answer is going to be based on evidence that you will find in the passage, because every question, there's only one right answer, and that one right answer is an answer that is backed up by evidence. The others are wrong for whatever reason, but the right answer has evidence. Okay, here are some examples of rephrasing. This is an exercise. I'm gonna have some water. Why don't you guys read these for a second. I whipped these up earlier. The author mentions the craft of cat hair felting. It's a real thing. Primarily in order to... So that question is sort of like, can I go back to the passage and like say, the author mentions the craft of you get tongue-tied even thinking about it or talking about it. So if you can rephrase that and say, why is the cat hair felting there? Why? Right? In order to is sort of a why. That's something you can keep in your head. Why is the cat hair felting there? And you go and you answer that question in your own words. And then you come across other ones that don't match. Let's look at the next one. The author introduces the second paragraph with the word luckily in order to. I would rephrase this saying, what does luckily do? Why is it there? Why? What does it do? Okay, what is the function or purpose of the word luckily? Okay? Go back, you answer that in your own words, cross out the ones that don't match your answer. the description in the third paragraph indicates that what Kermit values most about Miss Piggy is her. Is her what? Okay, so you go back and you say, how do I phrase it? Like, why? What does he value most about her? And you go back, and you may discover that it's her strength. There's an example of her strength, or her loyalty, and you'd say like, oh, it's the loyalty, and you go and you cross out the ones that don't, the answer choices that don't include loyalty, because there's evidence that tells you that the third paragraph, loyalty is key. Okay, so in the context of the passage, the author's use of the phrase "jiggy with it" is primarily meant to convey the idea that. Okay, so you say to yourself like, it's not what does "jiggy with it" mean, it's why does the author use that phrase? And you go back, like, why is it there? Is it because he's trying to be cool? Is it because he really loved Will Smith in the late 90s? We don't know. But you go back, you find evidence. There's clearly some evidence about why the author has decided to use this word. Okay, and then you answer that question, you come back, cross out the answers that don't, the choices that don't match. It's time to practice and to demonstrate what these strategies were. So, we talked about SQ3R. First thing we'll do is we'll read the blurb. The passage is adapted from Jan Delhy and Christian Kroll, a happiness test for the new measures of national well-being. How much better than GDP are they? Okay. It's about happiness and how it's related to GDP. That's interesting. I might not know what GDP is. I might learn that. And it might have something to do with happiness, or not. So we're going to learn about that. And then what I'll do is I'll have a quick look at the first sentences of these paragraphs. Currently a broad global movement away from considerations, global movement, that sounds big, away from considerations of mere economic success towards a new, so away from economics, away from that, towards a new public policy goal involving a broader notion of quality of life. Okay, quality of life, economics. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. This movement has also spurred a rethinking. Okay, so we're going to read we're skimming here, we're scanning. 3 key strategies have been employed. We have healing, complementing, replacing. This one is about the first group of initiatives. One key aim of this group of measures. Okay, and then that's a quick scan, and then I'm going to scan these. I'm just going to look at a couple of the questions in this set. We have a reference to a guy named Simon Kuznets. Okay, that's a memorable name. There's used in line 8. I'm going to find the word prominent, maybe circle it. And then I'm going to, first group of initiatives, I can maybe look for this first group of initiatives, but we could also do that later. I've already underlined that, but there it is, first group of initiatives. One other thing that you could think about doing when you're scanning, if that's something that you find yourself doing because you're short on time on the reading section, is that you can basically bring your finger down the center of this text. I'm not recommending this if you're not short on time. Okay, if you're looking for, if you feel like if you're the sort of test taker who runs out of time in the reading section and you need to pick up some points, you might find yourself looking for names like Simon Kuznets because you just don't have enough time to finish reading the passage. What you can do is to, bring your finger down the center of the text and say, oh, there he is. Okay. Similarly, I could be bringing my finger down the center of the text, and I say, first group of initiatives, and I saw that as well. So that's just another sort of skimming strategy that that you might need, that you could use if it helps. Okay. Let's check the time. Time is flying. So let's just go and let's see. There's one other question down here, which is a best evidence question. Okay, but we're not gonna spend time looking at these. Don't look at these now. Okay? Because your next step is to read the passage. And as you're reading, you will do this annotation that I've kind of shown you some of that. But now let's imagine we've read it. And I just want to use the riprap, use the rephrasing and prediction strategy to answer some of these questions. In the first paragraph, the reference to Simon Kuznets mainly serves to. So that is a, what does it do? What is its purpose? Why is Simon Kuznets referenced? So we're going to read around it. Okay, so let's start maybe here. This is the most prominent yardstick the media, politicians, and the public consider when they try to assess how a country is performing. However, this measure was never meant to be a measure of the welfare of nations. Okay, so he warned. Simon Kuznets is a guy. Simon Kuznets is a guy who warned about GDP being used as a measure of the welfare of nations. It's not meant to do that. So it serves to show that. So again, we're sort of going back to this question. The reference is serving to show that it never was meant to be that way. Okay, so let's look at the choices. We predicted. That's a little bit of prediction. What is the reference doing? It's saying that it was never meant to be a measure of the welfare of nations. Look at the choices. Is it to emphasize? Is it a reference to him to emphasize that the GDP is a respected and valid tool? That doesn't sound like what I was looking for. I'm going to skip to the next one. Underscore a common concern about the GDP. That sounds tempting. By citing a critic. He not a critic. He created it. Okay, so this makes that wrong. Okay. C. Clarify an abstract point about the development of GDP by mentioning its creator. Okay, they do mention their creator. Okay, I'm going to leave that in maybe. But an abstract point about the development, is he mentioned to clarify an abstract point? No. Okay, so be careful here. That looks good if you're just rushing at it. But if you keep in your head what you're looking for, let's look at D. Strengthen the argument that the GDP does not adequately measure well-being. Yeah, that's what the Simon said. It doesn't adequately measure well-being. That's our answer. Okay, so let's move on. Prominent most nearly means. Most prominent yardstick. I'm going to use the technique I talked about, the most prominent yardstick. That the media, I'm going to cover up the choices. Okay, that's the most useful, most pronounced yardstick, remarkable, recognized, or projecting. It's not a projecting yardstick. We're trying to use a word, most prominent yardstick that the media considers when they try to assess. They're just using it a lot. It's remarkable. No, it's prominent. It's recognized. It's a recognized yardstick. So we can plug in pronounced yardstick. Isn't really what we're looking for. We're looking for one that people are using, people are acknowledge is useful. First group of initiatives would primarily, check the time. Okay. First group of initiatives. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to say, what does the first group of initiatives do? What does it do? I'm rephrasing it. I'm going back. First group of initiatives, we had dealing with the downsides of GDP by attempting to fix the indicator itself. Fix the indicator itself. That's what the first initiative is doing. And then I may have to go down here because there's clearly some information here in this paragraph because it's about that whole indicator. One key aim of the group of measures is to account for sustainability. It gets kind of dense. For example, that's going to be supporting, evidence to support that claim. There's a however. I'm going to circle that. That's a but I'm going to circle. However, they also reflect additional social factors such as household labor and education with a rising value, while air pollution and environmental damage lower the score. As a consequence, downsides of economic growth and modernization ought to be accounted for whilst retaining the benefits, namely namely a single figure that captures different entities and is comparable across nations. So this group wants to find a different measure, okay? They're fixing the indicator itself. Okay, it's trying to fix so we know what we're looking for. Trying to fix the indicator itself. Change the measurement A. Change the measurement approach to encompass only social factors. Only is a kind of a giveaway here. He wants to capture everything. It's not exclusively social factors. I'm going to cross that out. It's extreme. Only is extreme. Every is extreme. You need to be careful about extreme answers. You want to really give them a strong check if you think that they might be right. Take both positive and negative factors into account universally. Universally is kind of extreme too, but we do have a balanced thing happening in this answer. I'm going to leave that in. Show the positive effects of modernization in its new measurements. That's not what I was looking for, right? This is what happens on the reading section. If you give the choices too much of the benefit of the doubt, you start doubting yourself, and you need to stick with what you know you're looking for, which is a balanced thing, a single figure that captures different entities and is comparable across nations. They need to reflect additional factors. Okay, so there are things here that's, again, this sort of balanced thing we're looking for. Shift the measurement of GDP so it's calculated per capita. That isn't mentioned. And show the positive effects of modernization. That wasn't mentioned either. It's got to be this. Okay, so a single word or a single phrase can disqualify an answer choice. And it's more reassuring when you know what you're looking for and you cross out the ones that don't match and you use process of elimination. Here we go. We're going to talk about math tests, top strategy, plugging in. We're going to go over 1, 2, 3, plugging in 1, 2, and 3 on some algebra questions that are really tricky. We have testing values, which can help you understand an algebra question that you might have more trouble conceptualizing. And we're also going to look at a problem that is plugging the point into the equation. Let's go to the next thing. So here's an example of a problem in which plugging in numbers can help you understand, make sense of what's going on in a problem. So let's get started. To edit a manuscript, Miguel is charging $50 for the first 2 hours and $20 per hour for after the first 2 hours. Which of the following expresses the amount in dollars C Miguel charges if it takes him X hours to edit a manuscript, where X is greater than 2? Okay, so the proper way to do this in math class, in algebra, is to understand that he's first charging the $50, and then he is going to charge $20 for every hour after the first 2, which means that you need to write X minus 2 in there. You may not realize that, and that may be something that's challenging for you. If you look at an algebra question and you think, I just can't understand what's going on here, you could try plugging in. How would that look? Well, in this case, we're not going to plug in 1, I'm not going to plug in 2, because X has got to be greater than 2. So we're going to try plugging in 3 and see what happens. So what does that mean? If I'm plugging in 2, if I'm plugging in 3, I'm going to write down X equals 3. And then I'm going to say, okay, what is X? X is the number of hours it takes to edit a manuscript. So if he has 3 hours, if he's charging for 3 hours, he's going to charge $50 for that first hour, and then in the second hour, and then that third hour, he's going to charge 20 bucks. So we have a grand total of 70. So this 70 is something that's kind of what needs to come out when X is 3. And so what you can do is you can take that 3 and plug it into our choices. So let's look at A. So A, we have 20 times 3. B, we have 20 times 3 plus 10. That looks good. C, we have 20 times 3 plus 50. D, we have 20 times 3 plus 90. Our answer is B. Okay, and as we see, it also matches up with what we did here. if you had, that's the correct way to conceptualize this problem, this will come out to be 50 plus 20x minus 40, because you distribute here and here. And that's going to give you 20x plus 10. Okay, so you can double check it that way. Both ways we have B. But plugging in can be super helpful, as you've just seen. So let's do a couple more. A voter registration drive was held in town Y. The number of voters V registered T days after the drive began can be estimated by the equation V equals 3,450 plus 65T. The question is, what is the best interpretation of the number 65 in this equation? Best interpretation of some component of an equation. This is a type of question that you're likely to see on Saturday. If the answer doesn't just jump out at you, you can start thinking about what it would mean to plug in different numbers and see what happens. Right? So if we're plugging in 1 for t, 1 day after the drive began, we'd have V is 3,450 plus 65 times 1. And if t is 2, this is t equals 1. This is t equals 2. This is t equals 3. We're going to do that. 3,450 plus 65 times 2. And then the next one is going to be 3,450 plus 65 times 3. And so what's happening here? Start looking at the choices. Like, what is that number doing? What is this number 65 doing? When we look at the choices, it seems to be increasing each day. The total number increases by 65. Right? The first one, we have, 165. Then we have 2 65s. Then we have 3 65s. What's happening here? Well, if we look at the choices, we have the number of registered voters. We have the number of registered voters at the beginning of the registration drive. So no, they weren't 65 at the beginning. It seems like 3,450 is the number at the beginning. Let's cross that all the way out. B, the number of registered voters at the end of the registration drive. Was that 65? No, let's cross that out. C, the total number of voters registered during the drive. 65? No. Okay, so our answer is D. And it makes sense. The number of voters registered each day during the drive. Each additional day, we have 65 more voters. So plugging in can help you make sense of questions like this as well. Okay, so let's move on to another one. This one's a little more tricky. It's about exponential growth, which is a more advanced concept. But you'll find that plugging in numbers can help here as well. And when do we know when to use plugging in numbers? Often it's with algebra questions that you can't really make sense of. So when you're trying to figure out what to do next, when you don't know what you're looking at with equations like this, let's read it first. Okay, so a biology class at Central High School predicted that the local population of animals will double in size every 12 years. The population at the beginning of 2014 was estimated to be 50 animals. So 2014 is 50 animals. If P represents the population N years after 2014, then which of the following equations represents the class's model of the population over time? Model of the population, kind of scary. If you can't look at these choices and say oh, that makes sense, it's got to be blah-de-blah, then what can you do? You can say to yourself, okay, what's happening here? Let's see what happens. It's doubling in size. We're doubling in size every 12 years. So in 2014, it's 50 animals. So when's it going to double? It's going to double 12 years from now. So we could say that that's 2026. But that's when n is 12. So when n is 12, then we should have a result that is 100. Right? So I'm going to plug in n equals 12 and see whether any of these things match. So I take 12 and I plug it into the choices. 12 plus 50 times 12 It's not 100. 50 plus 12 times 12, that's not 100. This one, we got 50 times 2 to the 12 n power. So we could look at that. Doesn't look like it'll be 100, but these are kind of confusing. So you may as well, let's just see what happens when we work it out. We have 50 times 2 to the 12 times 12. I mean, it's definitely not. 2 to the 144th power. That's huge. That number is immense. No way it's 100. So we could just say, okay, it's D. But let's look at this and say, well, let's just double check. 50 times 2 to the 12 over 12. 50 times 2 to the 1. 100. We have a winner. Okay, so we proved it to ourselves just by plugging in. Again, plugging in, really powerful strategy. Try it. Okay, one more. I can't overemphasize like how helpful this strategy can be. We can plug in numbers here. If the object of mass m is moving at speed v, the object's kinetic energy Ke is given by the equation here. If the mass of the object is halved, mass is times a half, and the speed is doubled, how does the kinetic energy change? If you were just rushing through this test and you weren't being careful, you might say, okay, halved and doubled, well, that should just cancel it out. Maybe it's unchanged. I wouldn't count on that kind of reasoning to answer the questions in the test. We're going to see in the reading section, it doesn't make sense to do that, to like read the question, look at the choices, choose the one that looks best. It's really not the best way to work your way through the test. Okay, so here's first I'll do it the way that would make sense to do properly. Okay, in the way that in terms of conceiving of this, we have a kinetic energy. We have a kinetic energy, 1. The first one, as it starts, is half times m1 v1 squared. Okay, then we're going to have a new kinetic energy, and m2 is going to be m1 divided by 2. So m2 is half of the original mass, right? And the speed is doubled, so v2 is 2 times v1. And then you can plug that all in and figure it out. So, but my point is this. Like, this will definitely, let's just go ahead and do it. So let's see, 1/2, and then Ke2 is going to be with m2, so that's m1 over 2, and it's times v squared, which is 2v1 squared. And we see that it isn't just unchanged. But the point I want to make here is that a special strategy is to plug in some stuff. So let's imagine that rather than dealing with all this m1, v1 things, I'm going to plug in like the mass, the first mass. Let's make mass 1. Mass 1 is going to be 2. And v1 is going to be 3. And I'm just plugging in 2 and 3. You can plug in other numbers. It doesn't matter. So let's see what happens. So our first kinetic energy is half times 2 times 3 squared. That's Ke1. And now Ke2 is going to be half. We're halving, okay, we need to cut the mass in half. So this is going to be times 1. And our velocity is going to be, let's see, v1 is going to be doubled. So this is times 6. And that gets squared. Okay, so Ke1 was half times 2 times 3 squared, which is 9. And this is half times 1 times 6 squared. So that's 18. So half times 1 times 36. So Ke2 equals 18. So our kinetic energy doubled because we went from 9 to 18. Okay? Another example of plugging in. Okay, one last plugging in example. Sometimes you're given an equation and then you're given points that you could plug into that equation. So let's read this. The function f is defined by this, where c is a constant. In the xy plane, so c is some constant. In the xy plane, the graph of f intersects the x-axis at 3 points. Here are the 3 points. What is the value of c? Well, you could try to do you could try to find the zeros of this equation. You could plug in the factors of this polynomial. Or it may be more straightforward for you to just choose one of these and plug it in. Choose one of these points. Let's start with that one. And plug it in. This is the point -4, 0, which means that this point works with this equation. So let's see what happens. 2 times -4 cubed plus 3 times -4 squared plus c times -4 plus 8. Okay, and that came out to be 0. Okay? F of x, that's, in this case, you could think of it as being y. The point -4, 0, when you plugged -4 into this equation, you came out and got 0. The value of the function is 0 there. So now we have to solve this. So -4 cubed is -64. 2 times -64 plus 3 times 16, because -4 times -4 is positive 16, plus c times -4. I can, that's plus -4c. Let's just say minus 4c. Plus 8 equals 0. Let's keep on boiling it down. We have -128 plus 48 minus 4c plus 8 equals 0. And -128 plus 48 is -80. Minus 4c plus 8 equals 0. Let's just move the 4c over there. -80 plus 8 is -72 equals 4c. So I added 4c to both sides. I add 4c, I have to add 4c, so it just swung over, and we divide by 4, and we get -18. Yeah, that's our answer. So it's still a hard question, don't get me wrong. This is a challenging question, but plugging the point into the equation is another kind of plugging in that you can do on the test.